Please look up. We've got a movie today and a movie tomorrow. I am showing the return of Food Inc. tonight. So that was like the first film from week number 1 back in good old October. But I had to cancel a Tuesday showing of it. And I thought it was probably better to show that movie on this Tuesday than the other movie, which is going to show on Wednesday. Yeah?
You've already seen Food Inc. You won't get credit for seeing it again.
Tomorrow I'm showing, honestly, one of the most politically biased or one-sided films of the year. I'm okay with that. I feel, first of all, I share some of the politics, and then wherever I can see it as frantic yelling, I'm kind of okay at picking that out. So it didn't really bother me very much. I don't want to disqualify the movie entirely. It's kind of interesting. It's called The Future of Food, and it's about how crazy our corn economy is and how powerful some of our food companies are, and some panic but some logic about GMOs. It's actually kind of good. Future of Food is showing tomorrow. But I just want to warn you, if you don't share the politics or whatever, you might find that to be a one-sided film, and I wanted to give you a heads up on that. Please take out your soils post-lab. The soil post-lab. The light and the dark. Whoa. Careful with that thing, Claire. This goes in the podium downstairs.
Oh my god.
No way. That goes in the podium downstairs. And somewhere over there. And also, I kind of wanted to see what the status is of the kids doing peeling and let me know what they do.
Are they doing it right now?
I hope so.
You got the wrong one.
Want me to go work on it?
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
I think that's
Just peel it?
that's what we did.
Yeah, then we can do the tying. I just don't want to get the hanging all the way across right now. If anything's ready to hang, just leave it drooping straight down.
I'm not good at tying anyways, so.
Fine, just let me know how it's
I just leave it in
going.
the bucket?
At least peeling, yeah.
Okay, got it. I think it's in your purse.
Or I'll give him a tub at the end of the table,
Yeah, I
Where did it go?
Yeah.
All right.
I say, I don't know where it went.
Bro, it's over there somewhere. I hope you find it. Claire can help you look through that purse, but it's right there. All right.
I found it in the purse.
Okay. The soil lab was... What do you want me to do? Nothing, just do that in the podium.
Oh, got it.
The soil lab was mostly just to introduce you to some of the characteristics and variables in soil. There's no right or wrong answers. You saw nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium testing. You saw pH. You saw soil composition and water retention. Great. Maybe we can come up with a pattern. Maybe it won't even fit. I'm not too stressed about that part. Just in case, I want to explore some of these variables, because there's always, if I get better than 50-50 on this pattern, I feel like we got lucky. So watch this. Please look at your results and see if there's a correlation between dark and light and the following. Organic material, don't say anything, but see which one had the most organic material, like floaters and miscellany on top of the clay. You might have to just remember that. Which one had the most nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium? Did the darker or the lighter have the higher levels? Which one had the most water retention, dark or light? Now, we tend to get more organic material in the darker soils. Raise your hand if that was true for your group. Floaters and stuff on top of the clay. Okay. Next, raise your hand if the darker soil came from an area that had more vegetation than the lighter soil. You'd notice that's a pretty obvious correlation. Now, Raise your hand if that darker soil had higher nutrient levels. And that's pretty much everybody who raised their hand earlier except for one exception. So you see it right there. More vegetation has more decomposing stuff, more organic material is being broken down by a soil food web to make the freed up ingredients that build life, that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that you tested for. It tends to be that darker soils, now that we've found all that other pattern, those will usually have the higher water retention. Raise your hand if that was true. You realize that plants have vascular tissues, so when a plant breaks down, there's microscopic straws that all fill up with water. But there is one exception. Whose lighter soil had more water retention? Now, your group, keep your hand up if the lighter soil had the greater clay content. So in this case, almost everyone had more water retention in the dark. A few of you had lighter soils with better water retention, but that can be explained by their high levels of clay, because clay is really good at retaining water as well. These loose generalizations, there's always some exception. There's always exceptions. But we kind of hit some general trends and some soil characteristics that might come up later in the exam. Anybody had any questions about soil stuff?
Our light soil actually had less clay than the dark soil.
Yeah.
Your lighter soil had less clay,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
higher water.
and it still had higher water retention? That's really surprising. That's a mystery to me. I can't explain that. Maybe we didn't identify the clay right, but...
Anya's the only one down there. She needs a key to get into the thing to get more mixing.
Can you text Garrett and Ava?
I don't have Ava's number and I don't think I have Garrett's either. Just send me their contact.
No, stay here. Next, take out the salinization lab, please. The post lab, I mean.
Which one? There's no sponsor. I'll buy some That's ridiculous.
Sean, didn't Jesse put that on?
Yeah, Jesse sold his spot to Sean, or Sean sold his spot to Jesse for $90.
Sean just said he's gonna park in a random.
Okay. In the salinization one, you might want to write stuff down. You already got your stamp. I'm not worried about your lab credit. What I am worried about, remember, is that this salinization one is a setup for experimental design and conversation to prepare you for the AP test. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you hear something that's a topic you didn't write about, you may want to just scribble a couple words down, because that paper, your salinization pre-lab and then the post-lab, I'm going to ask you to review those at the end of April to get you ready for the test in May.
What do you want me to text her?
Ask her if she and Garrett are coming to the greenhouse today or not.
At all? Or just during period?
That question, right? If they're coming today. At period 3.
Alright. At period 3?
What?
Is it at period 3?
During period 3. At period
Okay.
3.
Yeah.
Okay. What can we say? The easy statements, obvious conclusions from this lab. This is something that the AP test is usually kind of picky about, that when they ask you to design when they ask you to design an experiment, they'll be like, what sort of results would you be looking for? So what can we say here? Yeah.
The higher the salinization, the less sprouts.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty clear, right? There's not a lot of exceptions to that. What else can we say? That's all we can say? That's it? What about this? How much faith do you have in our seeds? Do you think the seeds were good? How can you tell that the seeds were good?
Because they all sprouted in 0% filtration water.
Right. You can see that we had really high germination, so we can rule out other problems. This is an important conclusion that a lot of you didn't notice. We can be confident that we've identified the right variable because we had really, really, really good success on this side of the tipping point and really, really low success on that side of the tipping point. Thanks. Oh my God. Seriously, every day. Can you have a conversation with the ASB folks to discuss your needs in life during this time of the day? I literally get these every day for you. I don't care what you do. You're definitely welcome to go. Okay. Please look up. It may seem obvious, but there's an important set of information here. We can be confident that the seeds were good, that the paper towels weren't toxic, that the petri dishes hadn't been otherwise corrupted, that our tap water was okay. Because we see really, really good germination at this extreme. And so only by changing the salinity, we see a significant change in the response by those seeds. So we found a good correlation between salinity and germination. And we know that the experiment really weeded out the other variables. Really, really good success, really, really bad success. So the only variable that could have been acting on the seed germination was this, salinity. Where could we have gone wrong? What are some possible errors in this? Yeah?
You say we used tap water?
We did.
Well, we don't know the initial salt percentage in the tap water.
That's right. And I should probably point out that I know it changes. When I've used distilled water for many years, I saw that the tipping point was closer to 1.7, 1.8. And when I switched to tap water, one year I realized, like, who really cares if I'm actually nailing this 10% thing? So when I started using regular old tap water, it seems to have shifted downhill a little bit to 1.5, 1.6. Yeah. Did you all notice that I just admitted another potential problem? That stuff was 10%-ish. Because you've all seen how careful I am, right? Like how seriously I take these numbers and labels and whatnot. So I made it 10% by like kind of pouring out what looked like about 10% of the water and then filling it up with salt until it was right about the right level and shaking it a little bit. Kind of 10%-ish. Yeah, okay. So salinity could have been a problem. Hey, there's one other variable that no one's mentioned yet. I'd like to move on to other things if we could get this over with. There's just one other thing that nobody's talked about. How many of you saw more mold at that end? How many of you saw more mold at that end? I'm trying to figure out if that could be just a correlation or a causation of the low germination. See, I was thinking, here's one possibility. Maybe the salt water keeps the seeds from germinating, so it's extra wet. All that extra moisture encourages mold. Mold needs carbon, darkness, and water. Here's the other possibility. What if that's a salt-loving mold that kills the seeds? Maybe it's the mold and not the salt, and that mold is just a ride-along in the salt water. Could be a correlation, not a causation. When you look at the answer key from the College Board, they'll usually have a list of possible errors. Human error is usually too cheap, so you'd have to identify what that human error was. Like maybe we mixed up the salt water with the fresh water, or maybe we didn't notice that one of our petri dishes was cracked, or maybe we did a bad job of sealing it with tape. But human error is usually too generic of a term. And then they would have stuff like that, like other confounding variables. So if you could identify that mold thing, for example, that might have been what one of the options on their list of acceptable things on the key. Okay. You look super bored, and I'm kind of out of stuff to say. Anybody have questions about these labs? Okay, take out 4-point movie questions. Which one is 4-point movie questions? 4.4 is the movie?
No, 4.3.
4.3 then. You're even worse than me.
Yeah.
You should make a 10% solution.
What? Found it all?
Stamped it backwards.
Staple the stamp page on first. Or just get that page stamped.
Okay. I'd like to move really quickly through the movies, but there's a bunch of study goals I want to add information in, including some like list of bullets and some vocab terms. I notice a lot of you have zoned out. Heads up, this does appear on the exam, and I do have a lot of details in the next part of the day here. Number 27, I'd like to come back to later. Number 28 talks about Indonesia's Green Revolution. You might know that Indonesia tried a variety of rice called IR8, which was like the 8th rice variety developed in Indonesia. And it's a perfect example of a bunch of stuff in the Green Revolution that you'll be writing about and taking notes on and then talking about. So, what happened to that IR8? If you guys don't talk more, I don't want to do all this. Like, I'm frustrated that a lot of kids haven't been speaking today. It makes it really hard for me to lecture when there's nobody talking back. Yeah.
It allowed them to yield like 3 times the amount of rice that they like previously were using, so it was like really vulnerable to pests.
Yeah, that's precisely accurate. It's a perfect example of Green Revolution. The Green Revolution, your warm-up today, was high yield varieties, like this type of rice that made 3 times as much yield. High yield varieties. But if your plants are growing extra fast and making tons of food, what do you know that they're going to require? Nutrients and water. And now comes a conversation that you may understand generally, but you have to note the details. How did Indonesia develop IR8? I can tell you for sure it wasn't genetic modification. Because when did the Green Revolution happen? 60s and 70s. GMOs weren't really a commercial option in the 60s and 70s. So they did it the old-fashioned way.
Was it just like selective breeding?
Plain old selective breeding. And I do need to talk a little bit about that. First of all, everybody knows how to make a chihuahua, right?
A what? A what?
A chihuahua?
Yeah.
How do you breed chihuahuas?
Oh, chihuahuas?
Yeah, Chihuahua. How do you breed Chihuahuas? You just take like the shortest, dumbest dogs and you make them have little short, dumb babies, right? Has anybody heard, like, which dogs are generally healthier or have a longer life with less problem? Purebreds or mutts? Isn't that weird? Which ones are the most intelligent? Purebreds or mutts? Mutts. Because when we breed for one thing, we tend to ignore the other variables. When you're trying to make the shortest dogs have babies, you're not really worried about controlling intelligence or hip health or life expectancy. You know, we've got dogs that can't even breathe and they basically die of like heart disease. American bulldogs and pugs. Anybody seen those dogs that like snort whenever they walk around and they just sound like they can't breathe because they can't breathe? It's like lung problem, like heart strain, like strokes and heart attack. High yield varieties were bred specifically for those high yields, but of course you had to trade off other characteristics, like maybe pest resistance or root health or leaf thickness. So you had to give them a bunch of food and water to make them grow really fast, and then they were selected for that one characteristic, but they tended to be really vulnerable to pests. So the Green Revolution was selectively bred high-yield varieties. It was extra water and fertilizer, and then the third part of that recipe was constant, repeated pesticide spraying. I've got some vocab coming up for you. You spray the pesticide, all the bugs die. There's only rice in the field. Which bugs are going to come right back? Rice bugs. Do they have any competition? No. Because you killed off all the other stuff and now there's nothing for them to eat. What about, do they have a lot of predator pressure? Predatory bugs? No, because you killed those off too. That's called pest resurgence, the fact that the bugs come back. Pest resurgence. I could probably write this on the board, huh? But how can the pests be coming back? I thought pesticides were really effective. Don't they kill like 99.9% of the pests? Yeah, they do. So what's left?
The ones that can survive the pests.
Right, the like 0.1% that are the hardiest. So when you use a whole bunch of pesticides, you get this phenomenon where you're accidentally but circumstantially selecting for stronger and stronger pests. Yeah?
So that's also why people don't like hand sanitizer?
That's precisely why people don't like hand sanitizer, except for Liam Ackler, who's obsessed with hand sanitizer. Yeah, I got a fun story for you. A couple of years ago, I was filleting a yellowtail, and my buddy was working across the table, and it was the first time he ever filleted yellowtail. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, you know, when I get to the underside of the fish, I like to make a cut like this so that I don't waste any meat below the spine and the belly. And he goes, wait, can I see how you do that? And I was like, sure. And I flipped the fish around facing my buddy. And then I went to make my cut. And because I wasn't facing the fish, I didn't notice that I was breaking through the abdominal cavity where there was no resistance because the fish was gutted. And so the knife just kind of went pop. And the tip of the fillet knife cut my index finger. And I was like, oh man, so I just like put a paper towel, I washed it, put a paper towel on it, but I had to keep filleting. We were in my carport at my house. And so I just put on like a rubber glove. and then my finger kept bleeding inside the glove in my fishy, goopy hand situation. So I just duct taped the glove and put on another glove. And then eventually that one started to fill up with blood from like the leaks in the first one. So I just kept adding gloves and duct taping until I was done filleting. And then I, went to the hospital and I got some stitches and everything was fine. And then they gave me some antibiotics because, the ocean has a lot of germs that can live inside of you. Because same pH and salinity as human blood. So the stuff that lives in the ocean can live in you really well. Like 2 days later, I walk in and I was like, I'm pretty sure I have an infection. Because like my hand was all red and swollen and I had like a bag of water inside my elbow. It's called swelled. And they're like, oh wow, that's really intense. You might have one of these staph infections that's resistant to antibiotics. Let's switch you to this antibiotic. And then 2 days later, I went in there and I was like, I'm pretty sure it's getting worse. And like my hand was like throbbing and you could feel the heat and it had like the visible red streaking. And they were like, oh, well, we went straight to like the really burly antibiotics. So you realize that there's basically only one antibiotic that we could still use. And he's like, if that doesn't work, you're going to lose your hand. I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's switch to that antibiotic, please. And I had to go every day after school and sit there and hold a stupid IV drip for 1 hour and get IV drip like straight lined into my hurt arm. Under the hopes that this would cure my staph infection. I went in every day, so it was Monday, then Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday. And when I went in on Thursday, they're like, if the swelling doesn't go down by tonight, we're cutting your hand off tomorrow. Don't make any plans this weekend. Make sure that your wife has like a bag, because if you come in on Friday and your hand's still swollen, we'll probably have to keep you in and then we'll transfer to that emergency surgery. And so my wife and I at dinner were kind of laughing, because you all know that she had breast cancer and she had just had her boob cut off. And then we were like kind of joking, tacky jokes for my poor children about like no boob, no hand jokes. I went to sleep thinking, well, I guess I'm losing my hand tomorrow. It was going to match, no big deal. And then I woke up on Friday morning and luckily the swelling had started to go down, and by the time I went in on Friday afternoon, it was like pretty cool. So we're like, oh, I think we're going to be all right. And then by Saturday, everything was mellow and I got so on my hand. Hooray. Hey, Miranda, I forgot to tell you that you have one of these ASB slips too. Are they gonna take any more of our students today?
Probably not.
Hi. Hey, so the way that bacteria can be resistant to antibiotics, we likewise select for the strongest pests. Pest resurgence tends to come with pesticide resistance. And so you end up in the final vocab term for the Green Revolution. Anybody know a place where you do a lot of work but stay put? Yeah, school, cubicles, this is fun. A treadmill. It's called a pesticide treadmill. Where you got to keep applying pesticide, but of course the bugs are all going to come back because there's no more predators and competitors, and they're going to be stronger than before. So you got to like increase the intensity of your pesticide, but of course you're just going to make stronger pests, and they're going to come back because there's no competition and predators, and they're going to be stronger than before. So you get resurgence with resistance, and then more pesticide, and then resurgence with resistance, and then more pesticide, and that's called the pesticide treadmill. Man, the Green Revolution, like, we fed this growing human population. That's so great. We avoided, like, a huge food crisis. That sounds nice. But paralleling that nice development was, of course, the reliance on agrochemicals. This is pretty much how we make most of the world's food, and it's tough to get away from that. You can breed for varieties that don't need as much pesticide, but they don't make as much food, and so in a competitive market, you'll never be able to sell those varieties. So we're just kind of stuck on the pesticide treadmill now. Anybody want to talk more about Indonesia? Number 29, OMG, poor Australia. I hope that your notes have all the right words. I'm going to go quickly. Australia's had the world's worst erosion. Because they ranched really intensively, and then, key problem, they replaced native grasses with European grasses. In a drought, all of those European grasses went extinct, and there was nothing left to hold the dirt. So, ranching, European grasses, drought, they all die. Crazy hell of erosion. How many of you have heard of the Dust Bowl? And this is exactly what happened in the American Dust Bowl. Everybody knows the punchline. There was a drought, and then the middle states blew away. Everybody knows the punchline. In all the U.S. history classes, they never give you the details. We killed all the prairie dogs, and so the prairie became less productive, so we had to use European grasses, and then the drought and the erosion. Hey, in number 30, there's 2 developments in the African Sahel region that are actually a really good idea in farming everywhere in the world. If you can describe them, I can tell you the terms. What did the Sahel region farmers do to make food with less water around? Yeah?
The tree lines.
It's called alley cropping. Where you grow your crops in between rows of trees, that's called alley cropping. And what's the other thing that they did? Oh, by the way, why does alley cropping help? What do those trees do?
Block the wind.
They block the wind and they shade to cool the soil. Okay, the other thing that they did?
The little rock dams.
Yeah, they're called low dams. We're not talking like Columbia River, like giant concrete structures that are like 300 feet tall. We're talking like speed bumps for runoff. If you can slow down the runoff, it's going to soak in more. So you get better watering out of every naturally occurring rainfall. So those are called low dams, and that other thing was called alley cropping. Because I suck at formatting, I clumped together a question in there that question about aquaculture. What percentage of the world's seafood is produced by aquaculture? The movie said 1/4. I gotta warn you, we're almost exactly at 50% today. There's some debate about how you measure aquaculture, but we produce almost half of our fish and seafood by farming it. Number 31, 4 problems with farming salmon. If you can describe those problems, I can tell you what they're called. Okay, so when the Atlantic salmon escape, it's called genetic pollution to the Pacific salmon. You realize that Atlantic salmon grow more quickly, so that's the species we farm. But they don't have all the right characteristics to survive in the Pacific. Jeez, Chloe. Silence in the back. So those Atlantic salmon, they distribute genes that are kind of sabotaging the gene pool of the Pacific. That's called genetic pollution. And they do escape pretty much all the time. Yeah?
The pathogen outbreak in Norway?
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of what, in humans, we call the elevator effect, where you're all moving around all day, but whenever you're all brought together into one place, you all share germs, and then you leave, like high school. You all know that like little kids will have like an outbreak of lice or something, and then all of a sudden like everybody that goes to that school comes home with lice, and then everybody else gets lice from the little kids. So this happens in seafood supplies. The place that we farm salmon is almost always a place that's good for salmon to live, and that's where native salmon also live. So in the Pacific Northwest, at the mouth of big rivers, that's where we choose to farm our salmon. And then, of course, that is a disease transmission threat to the natives, the transmission of disease. There's two problems left with farming salmon. Nope. They were listed in the movie. I was hoping that someone here had seen this part. What's that?
Concerns for human health.
Yeah, so because they're at the top of the food chain, they usually eat like kind of lower in the wild, but we feed them other big meaty stuff from the ocean that's easier to catch. So they have way higher levels of toxins than wild fish. Mercury levels, PCBs, all that stuff, about 10 times higher toxin load than wild fish. In the wild, they eat little stuff. In captivity, we grind up big stuff that's already high in toxins. And the fourth problem is also about their food supply. Did anybody catch this in the movie? Yeah?
Like we're over farming fish and to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the right way to say this is we are overfishing to make the feed for our farmed fish.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, salmon's at the top of the food chain. So we got to strip a whole bunch of seafood out of the ocean to farm salmon. Of course, that's starving all the wild salmon. And overall, we're taking more stuff out of the sea than if we were just taking wild salmon out. Because they're big predators, we have to fish a whole bunch to feed seafood to our salmon. Okay. You all look so sleepy. This is really embarrassing. Me trying to lecture all of you. You guys don't want to talk about it. Number 32. China does something really spiffy with their fish and ponds. Anybody catch that? Yeah, that's right. It's called carp polyculture.
Non-carnivorous.
That's right. Another good thing is that these are vegetarian fish. And BT dubs, they're in fresh water. So you can kind of contain them better. Polyculture, like numerous species of vegetarian carp in freshwater ponds.
You also said something about the byproducts from the crops feed the fish, and then the waste from the fish fertilizes the crops.
That's right. Because they're fresh water, you can use the fish poo as fertilizer. All the ammonium is. So that's like aquaponic systems, like we have in my shade house, all in the field there. Why shellfish? Yeah, you know, they actually don't go anywhere. They're not invasive. They're not going to get away. You don't have to chase them. Anybody else know why shellfish?
They don't need to be fed on their fish.
They don't need to be fed anything at all. And as a matter of fact, they filter feed the water. So you get your baby mussels and you put them in a cage and you drop it off a buoy, and then you go back 2 years later and they're right where you left them, except they're big and they're delicious and your water's cleaner now. You know that Hope Beach has a mussel farm? Anybody ever had Hope Ranch mussels? They're like farmed like right off Arroyo Burro Beach, like just west of the pit. Okay. Oh, the poor shrimps. What's our time frame? What do we have left? 13 minutes. Hey, so you all know that tuna I was eating today came from a generous man who just got done fishing in Mexico on a multi-day trip. Did everybody catch on to that detail? That it was Derek's father who gave me some tuna to eat. Yes, it was really tasty. Fun fact, when Homeboy was coming into the United States from his trip in Mexico, I'm going to assume that he was asleep because of the duration of his trip. But if he was awake, he would have seen huge pens where they do this tuna ranching. And this is a stupid, illogical loophole in how we regulate tuna fish internationally that you need to know about, because it's just so dumb and obvious this has to get fixed soon. In tuna ranching, you catch live tuna, put them in a cage to make them bigger. After they're the right size, you kill them and then you sell them as seafood. Here's the wacky thing. Because they're caught while they're alive, they're kept alive, that doesn't count as fishing. Even though you're going to kill and serve them to people as food a few years later. Wacky thing with tuna ranching is it's a global tuna harvest. It happens in Mexico and it happens in the Mediterranean. But that doesn't really count as tuna fishing. It's not part of global tuna quotas. And it's just a totally obvious, stupid loophole that, to my knowledge, still hasn't been fixed. I hope it will be soon. White tilapia, white catfish, white tilapia. One word and you can move on from that, number 35. White tilapia. What? Yeah, as a matter of fact, you can feed it vegetables and you can feed it farm waste. So you don't have to worry about their inputs. Same as catfish. These are freshwater fish that are tough and not very picky. And you can feed them almost anything. My hope was that I'd be able to feed my catfish crickets that we would breed on site using trash from the cafeteria. But we've just never gotten that together.
Where would you breed catfish?
We already have catfish. They're in our shade house. Yes.
Where? Like a pool, like a bathtub?
My coolness cannot be limited by your one short attention span, young man.
I'm just confused
Yeah,
about where you're
I know.
keeping it.
So they're in the shade house down there. We have 2 bathtubs and 4 IBC tins.
What's open ocean aquaculture?
So open ocean aquaculture is farming fish in floating bins in the deeper ocean. And the idea is that out there, they're not going to make the water nasty by concentrating all their poop, and they're not going to spread their diseases around. Less threat to native populations because the water's more spread out over there. Okay, we've got 3 study goals that you didn't get to see. I'd like to tell you about those, and then we'll be done with the movie goals. These are 36, 37, and 38. If you have your study guide, you might want to bring it out so that you can get the spelling of all these words. Okay. There is this place called, number 36, Tulare Lake. Tulare. T-U-L-A-R-E. Tulare.
Ow.
Look over here. This is Tulare Lake. Right here. Right here. You see it right there? That big blue lake right there? No, you don't see it because it's gone. Tulare Lake was the second largest lake in the United States and the largest lake west of the Mississippi. No. Yeah, largest lake west of the Mississippi. Outside of the Great Lakes, it was the largest, second largest lake in the United States. It was a seasonal lake because, please look up, this big ring of mountains only has one outlet, San Francisco Bay. So everything that hits all these mountains all drains out to right there. But if you look over here, you're actually like pretty much same level. And so the water stands around for a long, long time around here. Where we now grow all the food used to be seasonal wetlands. Desert for much of the year. And then in the spring, all the stuff would spill out of the mountains and this would all become lakes. Seasonal lakes. Tulare Lake was a seasonal lake. We choked off all of its water supply in dams and reservoirs. And then we started farming the lake bed. You know, it was really good dirt because it was the bottom of a seasonal lake, wetland soils. A giant seasonal lake. Water supply was dammed for farming. Lake bottom was farmed. Super ecologically thriving. And BT Dubs, please look over here. That's the story for thousands of much smaller wetlands and lakes throughout the Central Valley. Nowadays, almost no water from the Central Valley reaches the San Francisco Delta. Almost none. Number 37. This was part of a huge federal project. I got to talk politics for a minute. Raise your hand if you know what pork barrel spending is. What is that?
Congressmen take like large projects that will give their district more money so they can get reelected.
That's right. I got an example for you. My job. Not right now. Right now, I'm an employee of the school. But when I started teaching at Santa Barbara High School, y'all know Aiden Capps? He's a very good-looking, tall student, senior, I believe, at this school. Aiden's grandma, Lois Capps, was a senator, representative? Senator? Representative? Yeah, say Representative Lois Capps, yeah. She was a representative, and she got $120,000 from the U.S. Department of Education to try out a little environmental education startup project at her alma mater where she used to be a school nurse. Santa Barbara High School. And the nonprofit that wrote that grant said, Lois, thank you so much for helping us. come over and visit, and you can meet our new executive director, this guy that just got out of college that's all eager to go and is excited about doing environmental ed at Santa Barbara High School. So I walked in all dirty and stupid, like, hey guys. And it was like, oh my God, that's Lois Capps. And I was like, what are you doing here, lady? And she's like, well, you know, this was like a project that I was really excited to contribute to make sure that we Santa Barbara environmental. And I was like, yeah, whatever, lady, see you later, we're going to work now. And I started this thing over here. Okay, that's called pork barrel. Because you bring home a lot of bacon. Yeah, no, that's actually where it comes from. I'm not kidding. You go. You all realize that bacon used to be like a food for the rich? So during the Depression, like if you like had like a really good day at work and you got a whole bunch of extra money, you'd go to the butcher and they'd be like, do you want some more bones for your soup? And you'd be like, no, bro. I really killed it today. I'll take a pound of bacon. And the butcher would go like, whoa, big spender, all right. And you'd come home and be like, honey, I brought home the bacon. And she'd be like, oh my God, what a provider. And maybe that would work out. Bringing home the bacon is a Depression term about being a provider for the people that you take care of. Pork barrel legislation is when a government official takes federal funds from all America and brings them home to satisfy their voters, the people who they take care of, and they're hoping to be taken care of in return, be reelected or whatever. There was this time,
Oh my God.
like the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when we used tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of federal money to plug all the rivers so we could make water cheaper. Why would we need a lot of cheap water? Because we were using more water to grow food, because the Green Revolution, because we were trying to address global food shortages, and America was trying to leverage their position as like the world leader of everything because we won World War II. You understand how this all fits together? So we beat World War II, we got a population thing coming up, we take all of our federal dollars and we build dams everywhere. Like, please look up all of these dams. I wish I had more time, but I'm racing the bell. I used to do this thing where I would walk along and tap on all the dams. This guy, Jimmy Carter, had an idea. He said, maybe we're wasting money by sending it off. So he made this thing called the hit list. Remind me that we left off with Jimmy Carter's hit list. Yeah, he wasn't actually trying to kill anybody, but he was trying to